Aphoristic Appendage to On Truthtelling. 1001 to 1050. 1001. Life is material turned everyday miracle. 1002. The prey is the carnivore's way of getting to the herbs of the field. 1003. Suppose the stars, which are so distant from us, are from another perspective all very close. And suppose there are worlds within worlds. If all this is the case, as it could very well be, then everything that's closest to us is a sort of grand illusion, and even our worst sufferings and greatest problems much less significant than we take them to be. All I know is what you're saying couldn't be thought, if at all, except by those who've never suffered the worst or come close to suffering it. Well, even if that's true, does it make what I'm saying any less worth considering? No, but it makes it absolutely worthless to all those who've suffered a lot more than you, and for good reason. You're perfectly right. It's rubbish to them, which leads me to conclude that truth must forever be divided, with each person matching it to the good and bad they best understand, and for good reason. 1004. Wherever there are questions about what is good for this or that or here or there, don't expect truth to show up whole and undivided. 1005. Mediocre teachers become dangerous when they replace modesty with a sense of moral superiority. God only knows what monsters they can breed or become. 1006. These are the words of comfort I offer myself in the face of not having succeeded as well as others, but which they themselves might view as sour grapes. It must be sensational to sell, but something else to stick around. 1007. The fate of Atlantis revisited. In envisioning an ideal world, we moderns may be deluding ourselves by thinking that, by reversing the position and perspective of the ancients, we somehow surpass them. For them, the actualization of the perfect world precedes its being inhabited by perfectly constituted beings. We, on the other hand, envisage the actualization of, if not perfect beings, something close to it in the form of supremely conscientious members of society who pave the way for increasingly better conditions on earth. In the first case, it is understood that viewing ourselves as gods is not only foolish but also dangerous. In the second, it is assumed that this piece of wisdom is antiquated. 1008. Rest assured that, whenever there is a public debate over a highly divisive issue, there will be more than a few crazy things said on both sides that no faction or party will point out about itself. 1009. Life is more kind to us than we think, for if it simply bore gifts and glad tidings, if it didn't make heavy demands on us, there would be no story about us worth telling or listening to except what a god might interest himself in. 1010. Many people shine in their ignorance because they want to shine despite their ignorance. 1011. When we give children mediocre books to read simply because they're inoffensive, we poorly equip them for later life, where they may very well have to deal with things not only offensive but dangerous and destructive. 1012. Let us imagine someone who has lived long past the time he won fame and fortune in his youth. As the years go by and memories fade, would he not increasingly resemble someone who had never lived such a life but only imagined it? 1013. Only people who are relatively safe and secure have time and energy for phantom-like problems. 1014. Evil done in the name of good should warn us all of, among other things, its non-critical nature. 1015. Despite everything that can be said against them, lies and deception, which take their most benign form in popular stories and myths, will never fall out of favor as long as they can help people forget their routine, unexciting, and careworn lives. 1016. When we argue with someone over a controversial issue, it's easy to forget they have come to their conclusions on the basis of knowledge or information not identical to our own. On the other hand, assuming this knowledge or information, whatever it may be, to be less solid or convincing than our own is the default position of many of us. 1017. He who argues for the eradication of all social hierarchies must contend with the fact that argumentation itself is putting one position above another. Surely then he will have to weaken his if there's any chance of strengthening it. 1018. Imagine a scholar whose life's work is threatened by some new theory or paradigm. Will he go gentle into the good night? No, he'll likely rage against the dying of the light. 1019. It should never be forgotten, but perhaps always forgiven, that an absolute genius in one area can be a complete imbecile in another. 1020. When experts, especially those who are public figures, extend their conversation beyond a relatively narrow range of interests, they inevitably go beyond what first qualified them as experts. 1021. One way to start off a winning story with an extra kick would be, so-and-so was a raving success, but he did a lot of shit. 1022. Few arguments are original and therefore, when using them, our main concern is to be on the right side with the winning team. 1023. A person who is inclined to the contemplative life cannot put up with the company of others too long, for it tends to get between him and himself. What is a pleasurable distraction for others is for him often irksome and tiresome. He does not want to lose himself in the crowd, since he already feels a crowd within himself. For better or worse, it's this myriad of elements inhabiting all parts of his psyche that call to him most strongly. 1024. A city person who goes to live in the country and puts on airs will no doubt meet with ridicule. Similarly, a country person who goes to live in the city and continues to act as if he were in the country will meet with scorn. Here we have a clear division which, although not overtly moral or political, lays the basis for one. 1025. If making everyone equal means lowering standards instead of raising as many as possible to a higher standard, then surely we're dealing with a principle that must become either a parody of itself or, perhaps the same thing, a poor man's paradise. 1026. Politicians and political activists who go out of their way to offend large segments of the population are, to say the least, taking a big risk. 1027. One of the biggest and most boneheaded mistakes is to assume that all members of an identifiable group should have the same idea of who and what they are. 1028. Absolute purity is unattainable in life, but striving to get it in some form or other is common enough. 1029. The biggest difference between science at the purely theoretical or experimental level and at the popular level is that the "this might or must be the way it is" becomes simply, "this is the way it is." 1030. In order to influence the general public, both politicians and the media count on a large number of people drawing from them as their one source of information. 1031. A civilization that is hundreds if not thousands of years old can be undone either by slow degrees or in an instant. 1032. Corruption in human affairs should come as no surprise because its very nature is to come without warning, incrementally, on cat's paws. 1033. Our thinking is forever limited not only on account of all that's unknown about the past but also the future. 1034. There are no final answers but only those that claim to be. Of course, this doesn't prevent them from being belief systems that, although limited, can eventually be replaced. 1035. Being embraced by a political party as a sympathetic outsider carries with it the risk of, at least with respect to integrity, no longer wishing to be on the outside. 1036. There are some public figures who, formerly celebrated but then seeing their popularity slip away, try to increase it by playing upon and promoting a popular prejudice. Truly they have joined the ranks of those who belong to the oldest profession. 1037. There are many things that start off as grand projects but end up failing. However, if such undertakings didn't begin with at least the hope of success, all pushing beyond the bounds of the ordinary and giving an opportunity for something new to develop would never see the light of day. 1038. Competition generates interest with a form that transcends content. The game-like and the warlike can pitch a tent and happily share it while selling their wares. 1039. Man is a wolf, said one. Man is a sheep, said another. Man is a wolf in sheep's clothing, said a third. No, man is a sheep in wolf's clothing, said a fourth. A sheep in wolf's clothing, protested the third. What does that mean? Not much, answered the fourth, except that a certain play of words can make it sound as if one said something. So, in fact, insisted the third, you've said nothing. On the contrary, responded the fourth, I think I've said a great deal. 1040. While the great limitation of philosophy in the university is that it's part of the rat race, its great distinction is its being the most self-questioning part. 1041. Without massive diversity that overrides all contrary effects, there would be no equivalent array of opportunities and possibilities that arise from interactive elements both so great and small as to merge with the unobservable. 1042. When we buy into life, we buy into everything. A blue sky, for example, that could always turn red or black. 1043. Among cell phone users, there is this noticeable tendency to be on top of calls as if expecting one from a great benefactor. 1044. It's strange to think how many projects done under the pressure of time now stand before us as unhurried as the pyramids. 1045. Generally speaking, foolishness is bad, but, if one needs a diversion, not being indifferent to it speaks in its favor. 1046. Brother, let me tell you something. If I had to count up all the bad things I've done in my life and line them up, I'd disown myself. You think I'm exaggerating? Well, let me tell you, I've done everything from the foolish to the vulgar to the perverted and even to the criminal. Now, what do you say? Brother, if I were to say I was shocked, I would first have to ask myself, why am I shocked? Is it because of what he has done in his life or his frankness in saying it? Then, if I were inclined to judge you, I would first have to do an inventory of all the bad things I've done in my life. If it came close to being like yours, then perhaps all I could do would be to join you with a similar act of self-condemnation. Brother, that's one of the most honest answers one's likely to get this side of childhood or sainthood. 1047. How the mighty have fallen, is an old saying that stood the test of time. It would be wise to keep it in mind while watching various leaders strut about on the world stage. 1048. In principle, all nations refrain from warfare except when it's a case of self-defense. In practice, all nations engage in it whenever it suits their interests. 1049. At virtually all levels of political discourse, slandering the enemy is a common practice and, indeed, no more so than when it's done on a grand scale. Surely this wouldn't be the case were it not for the fact that it's a principle implicitly approved of in practice while being a practice explicitly disapproved of in principle. 1050. In politics, when there are no arguments or evidence to use against an enemy, unsupported accusations will do. They will be deployed with the same good conscience that normally goes with doing lesser wrongs in secret.